pressure continues to be normal.
RCP chamber pressure looks good. Toggling up. Roger roll with Atlantic.
Water towers can fly!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight down side, SCE off.
Say again, SCE off. Off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.
Well, good evening, everyone. You're looking at a live view through a good bit of haze at Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Now, if you can kind of make it out on your screen there through the haze, we're looking at a Falcon 9 on the pad getting ready to lift off in just under 30 minutes. Now, this Falcon 9 is going to be carrying, mispronounced that, Eutelsat-10B to geostationary transfer orbit. And we'll discuss a little bit more about what that all means and what we're going to be seeing later in this broadcast. But first, I'd like to introduce everybody I've got here as my co-hosts on the live stream. First off, Julia Bergeron. How are we doing, Julia?
I am doing fabulous. It finally stopped raining around here, so I'm really happy. Hi, everyone.
Awesome. We also have Sawyer here, another regular on the live stream. How are we doing, Sawyer?
We are doing really good. Let's hope that this one is a little bit better than the earlier Falcon today, and let's fly.
Yeah, definitely. Seems like SpaceX has at least a little confidence in lifting off tonight. Thomas, also in the field, is operating the camera. How are we doing out there, Thomas? How's it looking?
We are back out there. It is less wet than during the CRS attempt earlier today, and maybe SpaceX will get a little lucky and actually be able to get this mission off the ground today. Still no confirmation that they even went go for propellant load until we actually saw vapors coming from near the rocket. So on your screen, you can tell that propellant load is underway. We'll see if SpaceX starts providing some updates here shortly. But they're fueling up again. This could be a case similar to CRS where they fuel with the hopes that weather will clear by the end of the countdown, and see if they get a hole in the weather. And if they don't, they'll abort from there. Or maybe the weather is actually trending positively, and they think they have got a good shot. Either way, they are propellant loading, so we're here to cover it as a launch attempt, and we'll have to stay tuned and see what happens.
Yeah, and if I recall correctly, Thomas, they only have a 10% go prediction for this window. Is that correct?
That is the prediction coming into the window, yeah, when they release their latest mission execution forecast. Now, they'll definitely be looking at more recent data than that in mission control right now. If you covered the CRS mission earlier today, you saw that prediction went up to about 30% go during the countdown. So that they get constant updates on that weather probability throughout the countdown, and they get a final briefing just a few minutes before launch. So we will see if they give any updates as to a new forecast. But it's not zero because they are propellant loading.
Yeah, and as Thomas mentioned earlier, this is the second launch attempt of a Falcon 9 rocket today. Earlier, just a few miles north at Pad 39A, SpaceX attempted to launch a CRS-26 on a brand new Falcon 9 booster. Unfortunately, that was scrubbed due to weather. However, they are attempting to launch Eutelsat-10B tonight. Hopefully, they'll find a little gap in the weather. They seem to have a little bit of confidence that maybe there's a chance that they'll find a gap in the weather. As we could see, propellant loading is ongoing. We haven't heard a direct go for propellant load from SpaceX, but I mean, as you can see on the screen, there is something going into those propellant tanks. And I think something really interesting to talk about as we dive into what's going on here on screen is that booster looks a little different. Now, Sawyer, the interstage looks white, the landing legs look white. What is this conglomeration of a booster on screen that we're looking at right now? Why does this look so different?
Well, first off, we should be nice to B1049. It's the oldest one in the fleet at this point, as most importantly, though, this is the final flight for this booster. It will be expended after this particular launch. So, as a result of that, the white at the bottom is because the landing legs that it would normally use to land either on a drone ship or back at the landing zones 1 or 2, it's not landing, so they are removed. As for the interstage, it is actually using a slightly older version of that interstage. That's why it's white as opposed to the black that we're used to seeing commonly on the Block 5 Falcon 9s. So in fact, the one that was originally on 1049 was swapped out and is currently the interstage on 1042. But as for the history of this booster, just so you're aware, it first flew back in September of 2018 on Telstar 18V. Then it did an Iridium Next 8 launch, and then the rest of its 8 flights were Starlinks. And so this will be its final one as it's expended. Did I say 1052? Just making sure I said that.
Yes, the interstage was transferred to 1052 when it was changed over from a Falcon Heavy sidecore to a Falcon 9 booster.
Yeah, I meant 1052, not 1042. And by the way, if you want to see a better look at that as well, you can check out the latest KSC flyover video that just got put out. You can actually see a really close look at the interstage and the differences and basically where that new adapter is.
Yeah, and unfortunately, while SpaceX is not doing booster recovery, that does not mean there are no recoveries on this mission. So, Julia, what is being recovered on this mission? It seems that they sent out some support ships very far downrange. So, what are they recovering? Is that just to monitor the launch?
No, we don't go out just to monitor the launch. Now, that would be expensive, but we do go out to recover things. And in this case, Doug is out there to recover the fairings. So if we can't recover the booster, we're going to recover the fairings. And when you said very, very far out, 549 nautical miles downrange, basically Bermuda Triangle territory is where 1049 will be expended. That means we're yeeting this payload pretty darn far, and there's this new word that I've never heard in our live stream that maybe Thomas can explain, but super synchronous orbit. I bet that has something to do with why we're yeeting this booster so far.
Sure does. Yeah, today's mission, like we mentioned earlier, is going to a geostationary transfer orbit. That's pretty standard. Falcon 9 has flown plenty of payloads in that direction. But you mentioned that this is an expendable mission, and the reason for that is some combination of this is an older booster, so they're willing to offer it as an expendable flight. It's definitely possible that this booster has seen some pretty extensive inspections and things like that, and it's not perhaps as fully up to date as the newer Block 5 boosters in the fleet. However, the bigger driver in this decision has got to be that the customer requested what's called a super synchronous transfer orbit. And that means a couple different things. First of all, different rockets can get payloads to different geostationary transfer orbits. Basically, that's classified by the amount of energy left that the satellite will need to impart on itself to get to geostationary orbit, the final orbit. So that's basically how high is your perigee, the lowest point in your transfer orbit. So how much longer do you have to go till you're back in a circular geo orbit? And when you go super synchronous, that actually helps that even further. And that means you take the highest point in your transfer orbit, the apogee, and put it beyond the altitude of geostationary orbit. So you are super synchronous above the geosynchronous altitude. And you do that because if you perform your perigee raising maneuvers at that altitude, it's actually much more efficient. It's due to the Oberth effect, if for those who are orbital mechanics nerds. But it does basically give the satellite just a bit more energy, and it helps it get to its final orbit faster, and doesn't need to spend as much time raising its perigee up into its operational orbit. So that is the task that Falcon 9 and B-49 are up to tonight.
Very cool. And we're going to take a moment here real quick just to take a look at the countdown. So right now we're coming up on about T-minus 21 minutes. So right now what's happening is the rocket is being loaded with kerosene or RP-1 propellants. The first stage is also being loaded with liquid oxygen, and we're about 5 minutes away from the second stage being loaded with liquid oxygen. Now, because liquid oxygen is super, super, super cold, and Florida is relatively warm, the liquid oxygen likes to boil. And when you have warmed liquid oxygen, it becomes less dense, and you get less performance out of your engines using less dense liquid oxygen. So SpaceX tries to load the liquid oxygen as late in the countdown as they possibly can to make sure it's as cold as they can possibly get it. So coming up now in about 4 minutes, we'll begin liquid oxygen loading on the second stage just to get it as late as possible. But before that, coming up in about 30 seconds, we have the famous T-minus 20-minute vent. Now, Thomas, what is this T-minus 20-minute vent? We've all heard about it. It's being memed a lot. What are we looking at when the T-minus 20-minute vent happens?
Yeah, well, there it goes right on cue, that vent from the transporter erector. It's not from the rocket itself, it's from the ground support equipment, specifically the lines traveling up the TE up towards the second stage of Falcon 9. This vent is actually mostly nitrogen, and it's being used to purge the lines on the TE after they were used to just fill the upper stage with RP-1 kerosene. And if we had countdown audio from the SpaceX mission control, or launch control, I should say, they would have called out that RP-1 load on the upper stage is now complete. And that's because if you think about it, obviously the first stage is much bigger than the upper stage. So they're loading both commodities, RP-1 kerosene and liquid oxygen, into the first stage simultaneously throughout basically the entire countdown. For the upper stage, they load one, then the other. They load kerosene first because it's much more stable. So in the last few minutes of the countdown, it won't boil off as much, whereas liquid oxygen would boil off if you loaded it earlier. So they do the kerosene first, and then they purge the lines up to the second stage with nitrogen to make sure no remaining kerosene is there, so that they can then load liquid oxygen. And so at the 16-minute mark, that purge will be complete, and they will start flowing liquid oxygen into stage 2 to complete the propellant loading process.
Gotcha. Very cool. So yeah, it seems that all is on track. That vent happened around the time that we would expect it at. So it seems like we are just under 19 minutes away from liftoff, which is very cool to see. Very great to see that. We have an interesting question here from Amiga Clone saying, is 3 Falcon 9 boosters being fueled at different locations on the same day a record? And this one I don't really know, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was a record. So for those who are unaware, we had the CRS-26 booster and second stage being filled earlier today. We have obviously Eutelsat being fueled, but also on their McGregor live cameras, we caught booster 1078 being tested on the first stage test stand there. So 3 different Falcon 9 first stages were fully fueled today. That seems like it would be a record to me. I don't know if anyone actually keeps that record here or if that's
I can think of at least one example that might be a bit of an asterisk, because technically, if you fuel a Falcon Heavy, is that not 3 Falcon
yeah.
boosters at once? So as far
Yeah.
as 3 completely separate vehicles, that's probably a record, because there weren't many times that Falcon 9s, there were 2 Falcon 9 launch attempts in a day, and I think today is the first time we heard of them also doing a McGregor fueling. But if you count Falcon Heavy, then there's your caveat.
I mean, technically, it's only 2 Falcon 9s because the 2 side cores can be reused as Falcon Heavy, or as this 2 side cores can be
Yeah,
used
it
as
depends on
regular
how you
Falcon
phrase
9s,
the
but
question. Is it Falcon boosters or is it Falcon 9s? And if it's Falcon 9s, then technically you still only fueled 2, because the one in McGregor was only the first stage, not a complete Falcon 9. But depends on how you count it, I guess.
Very cool. I thought that was just a neat little question there for a little first. I'd also like to thank Marissa McCartney for becoming a PADRAT member. Now, we've said it many times before, but our membership program is a great way to support the work that we do. And it also comes with some neat benefits. So the lower tiers of the memberships, you can get emojis in chat, you can get early access to some preview clips of both activities in Boca Chica, as well as other activities that we record and photograph. So thank you, Marissa. We really appreciate that support through your membership there. Also with Jim Cavett here with $2, just simply saying, hey, nerds. Hey, Jim. Thank you for your support. We appreciate that. Musical Wolves here with $5 saying, had CRS launched, would it be the same Falcon crew for this launch? That's a good question. Do they have the same launch support crew? Does anyone here know that answer?
It's got to be no, right? I mean, Julia, you've been around here too. I would imagine they've got to have 2 different teams entirely for these 2 missions, right?
Yeah, there is a red team and a blue team.
Well, very cool.
And I've seen vehicles that reflect that as well. So yeah, there's 2 launch teams.
Very neat. That's something that I just learned. So hope that answered your question, Musical Wolves, and we appreciate your support as always. We know you're a regular on the stream and a regular to supporting us, so thank you very much.
Really quick jumping in, I mentioned earlier that when that purge stops, that means they're starting stage 2 liquid oxygen load, and that vent has stopped. So stage 2 LUX load is now underway.
Awesome. Coming up right at T-minus 16 minutes, so it seems like we are on cue for a liftoff in, as I said, 16 minutes. So all looks good here in the countdown. Now, SA here with a $10.
And also, sorry,
ahead,
just
Thomas.
jumping with one more update, Eutelsat-10B is now on internal power.
Excellent. So again, we're continuing with the countdown, continuing with propellant load. SpaceX is optimistic that they may find a gap in the weather to permit liftoff. But again, we're going to see. We're going to take this carefully. It seems like the haze, Thomas, has kind of let up a little bit. I know that's not really a condition for launch, but just a little observation here. It seems like it's got a little less foggy down there.
Maybe a little. Maybe we'll get a little lucky. Not a launch commit criteria, but definitely one we like to see from the broadcasting side of things. So
Yeah, exactly. I mean, hey, I'm not jealous. I'm greedy. I want all the good rocket videos. I want all the good rocket pictures. And from SA here, a $10 super chat saying, "Open message to the person who's doing the rain and weather dance. Please stop the rocket. we're in rocket withdrawal from SLS. Love to see that. So yeah, we hope that the rain and the weather lets up and they can find a little gap. But thank you for support, SA. We appreciate that. And last but not least, Tracy has gifted 5 Red Team memberships. Thank you very much, Tracy. We appreciate that. And to everyone who got a membership because of Tracy, we hope that you enjoy all the perks that you got because of it. And now looking back at the launch, we have a question from Ice Blue here asking what kind of satellite is on board. And you're right, we haven't really discussed much about the satellite on board. So on board is Eutelsat-10B. This will be replacing Eutelsat-10A in orbit, which is coming up at the end of its service life in about a year. So this is just an ordinary satellite replacement at the end of a satellite's lifetime. Now this satellite is... it has 2 payloads on board for high transmission satellite signals. Each can have about 120 gigabit per second, and Eutelsat will use this to serve customers all around the world. Now, like Thomas said, this is being launched into a super synchronous orbit, so it's basically a geostationary orbit, but with a much higher apogee, and that's to help with later orbital adjustments of the satellite to make it require less fuel. So that's what we have on board today. It's a geostationary transfer orbit mission, and coming up in about 13 minutes.
Yep, and along those lines, in terms of that energy saving, they actually use plasma thrusters on these to get it into its orbit. And another important thing on board this one that we talk about, it's got the KU band payloads like you were talking about with the high throughput satellites info. But the big thing is that it has 36 KU band transponders and 20 C band transponders. So in addition to its traditional, replacement of the Eutelsat 10A, my guess is that there's also that C-band aspect, which you've probably heard all of the great big C-band changes that have been happening with all the recent launches, as the U.S. Is about to create a law that will go into effect at the end of next year that will require a portion of that C-band to be dedicated to 5G. So any satellite that's operating in that particular band will have to move to a slightly higher band. So a lot of companies are also launching new satellites, or if they build these new satellites to replace such as this one, have it so that it stays out of that range for when it covers North America.
Very cool. Thanks for the information there, Sawyer. We have a question here from Obi-Wan Jacoby saying, is the propellant simply lost on a scrub, or do they attempt to save some or any of it? And the answer is yes, they do attempt to save the propellant. The RP-1, obviously, because you can't dump that outside of your rocket or you're going to have some environmental, some EPA people knocking on your door. They do save the RP-1. The RP-1 propellant is simply pumped out of the vehicle, then re-chilled for the next attempt. Similarly, most of the liquid oxygen is able to be pumped out of the vehicle. Of course, as you can see on the screen here, some liquid oxygen boils off over time, so it has to be vented. So you're unable to get all of your liquid oxygen back, but most of the propellants on the vehicle and the helium as well for pressurizing is able to be saved and brought out of the vehicle for use later. So not much of a loss of propellant if you do decide to scrub, but yeah, they are able to get some of that back. So thanks for the question, Obi-Wan Jacoby. We appreciate that. And North Coast here has an interesting question saying, what is the purpose of the fin-like things on the interstage of Falcon when the Dragon is on board? So, Sawyer, what are those fin things on the interstage? What are those used for?
I'm not sure entirely sure which fins you're talking about. Are you talking about the one attached to the
I think
to
they're
the
talking
Dragon?
about the trunk, Sawyer, yeah.
Yeah. So
Oh,
that
the
is
interstage. Okay, yeah, the trunk. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not particularly on the interstage. At the bottom of the Dragon is what's called the trunk. So inside of the Dragon capsule is pressurized, which allows for pressurized payloads, but at the same time, there are also experiments that are fine just being exposed to the vacuum of space that may be attached to the outside of the station. So the trunk is unpressurized and exposed to the vacuum of space. So while it's flying, you will see that trunk on the outside, and the black sort of wrapping around it is the solar arrays that help power it. I'm not sure in particular, though, about the interstage. The only thing that might be there would be grid fins, which are used to help with the booster landing as it re-enters the atmosphere, which CRS-26 was going to be landing on a drone ship.
Yep, and of course, on screen here, obviously, there's no grid fins on the interstage of this vehicle because Booster 1049, unfortunately, is being expended, going out with a bit of a Viking funeral in about about 15 minutes or so if things go correctly tonight. But thanks for the question, North Coast. And one here from Patrick Frame saying, have we heard anything new about the crew arm at SLC-40? Is that for sure a go-ahead? Thomas, has there been any more discussion about that beyond NASA just simply confirming they're looking into that?
I believe they have confirmed that they plan to move forward with that. Last we heard, this was back for the Crew 5 media conferences, because obviously that's when people were talking about Crew Dragon operations. The plan was to add Space Launch Complex 40 as a Crew Dragon launch site, which means building a crew access tower. However, they confirmed at that time that no hardware was being built yet. So they're still pretty early in that process. I think that's basically weighing the difference between Starship isn't launching from 39A anytime soon, and that's kind of what's driving the need for a crew tower at 40, just so they can help separate some of those operations. So they are probably moving forward with that, or at least they plan to. But it's so early on that no hardware being built or anything yet.
Hey,
yeah.
Thomas, when we did a flyover, by the way, y'all, you need to watch the flyover video that just came out. We saw tower segments. Is it possible anything like that is 440?
That's a great question, Julia. Yeah, we get that question a lot too. To do the tower segments that they're building that look like the Starship tower segments that we've already seen them install there in May, and of course down in Starbase. Could they be actually being repurposed as crew access tower? And the answer is no, because of two reasons. First of all, like I said, NASA confirmed that they were not building hardware yet, and those tower segments were already existing at that point. So we know they're not for the tower because NASA confirmed no hardware had been built. And two, all the Starship tower segments do have a lot of bits and pieces that are very specific to Starship and would not be there if they were building them for other purposes. So we are very, very confident that those tower segments are for future Starship launch sites, either here in Florida or on some sea launch platform or something. And they're just taking advantage of the facilities here at I just said Texas, here in Florida, to build out more segments because they know they'll need them eventually. But they're not for Pad 40, at least not for crew access tower purposes. And it'd be pretty difficult to make Pad 40 a Starship tower, so don't think they're going to do that either.
All right, very cool. And thank you for the question, Patrick. We hope that answered it. But also something that we really want to discuss is our new merch. Now, I believe we discussed it at the beginning of the broadcast, but we have some new merch ready for the holidays. So Merry X-Mars is our new line of merch. And not only does this have a comfy sweatshirt with our Mars Christmas design that we have on there, and also, if you want to take a look, zoom in at all of the Easter eggs we've packed in there. This design has been under work for a little while, and we have packed it with a whole bunch of different SpaceX references on there, and spaceflight references in general. So we hope that you really enjoy those. But not only is this a shirt, but it's also available as a mug and even greeting cards. So there's a whole variety of items available with this brand new Merry X-Mars design. So we hope that you like these, and head over to shop.nasaspaceflight.com to check these out. And it's a great way to support us, great way to support the work that we do, and a great way to get something that'll look great in any application. So now looking back on screen here, we're just past T-minus 7 minutes in the countdown. So Falcon 9 should be undergoing engine chill right now. And you can see a lot of venting and a lot of condensation coming off the rocket there. So that is showing that it is almost full of propellants. It seems like SpaceX is still pretty confident that they may find a little gap in the weather there. Of course, we're going to be listening in on the countdown net, and we'll give you any updates as we hear them. But it seems like all is well in the countdown right now. And again, we're coming up here on just T-minus 6 minutes until liftoff. And we have a $5 super chat here from Laylo saying their mom won't let them stay past their bedtime. Can you ask her to let them stay up past their bedtime? Well, we hope that you are able to see this launch, and it should be pretty interesting if we're able to see liftoff there. And we just heard a confirmation.
It's an educational experience, so I think it counts.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very educational experience. Great way to see some science and STEM principles in action here. And we just heard that stage 1 RP load is complete, and that the weather is actually tracking favorably here. So that is good to hear that SpaceX may have actually found a gap in the weather and maybe go for launch in just over 5 minutes. Again, we're going to see how that goes throughout the rest of the countdown, but it seems like they've found their little hole in the weather there. And a great shot there from Fleet Cam showing the clouds overhead. Seems that it's looking a little clearer, or maybe that's just just me looking here on the screen, but it seems like it's clearing up a little bit down there, which is good to see. And Roseanne DeVasto here saying, any range update? Well, we hope that just answered your question right there before. We appreciate your support, though, and thank you very much for the super chat.
Yeah, this is about the point in the countdown where during CRS they got their final weather brief, so maybe that points to the fact that they may be go. They might give one final quick glance look at their latest data at like the 60-second mark or so, and we'll let you know. But so far, everything on track, and looks like they're going to give this one a go.
Yep, usually they get to around 30 seconds or so before they scrub due to weather, so once we get past the around 30-second mark, it seems like they may be going ahead. So again, 4.5 minutes until liftoff. Vehicle is almost fully loaded with propellants. RP1 load is complete on the first stage. So again, seems like a smooth countdown. Let's keep our fingers crossed and let's keep watching the countdown. Laylo again here with a follow-up saying, sweet, it's worked. Bedtime was moved to after launch. Well, congratulations, Laylo, and we hope that this liftoff goes off so you can see it. And Dan here saying, they asked us during Artemis, but they don't know if it was answered. On SES, there appears to be a split ring that comes off the nozzle bell. What is that used for? Oh, okay. So on second engine start, a little ring comes off the second stage engine. Sawyer, what are we looking at there when we see a little ring come off the Falcon 9 second stage engine?
I believe that's related to the adapter, but I'm not 100% sure on that one. If someone else knows and wants to chime in.
A stiffener ring, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe so.
I think it's actually something to do with just holding the nozzle in place during the initial phases of flight. I don't remember if it's important at ignition itself, or like Sawyer said, I think it might just be a matter of how that stage or how that bell interacts with the first stage while they're riding uphill. But yeah, it's completely designed to come off. You can look back at any number of Falcon 9 flights and you'll see it every single time. And it falls back suborbitably, disintegrates in the atmosphere. It's a little piece of metal. But yeah, it's called an MVAX stiffener ring, to be specific.
Yeah.
Yep, sounds about right. And we're coming up here on T-3 minutes. We saw a little bit there from SpaceX cameras on the Lightning Tower. Falcon 9 venting like crazy. It's like a little smoke machine over there. And again, they're still pressing ahead with the countdown. Seems like they still have confidence that they could find the little hole in the window. Stage 1 LOX load is complete, so liquid oxygen is now fully loaded on the first stage. Great sign there in the countdown.
And a reminder, that is completely normal, all of that venting, and the last vent that you'll see will likely be the final purge of the lines on that TE, which should already be slightly retracted away, or about to slightly retract away.
Awesome, and yeah, great shot there. We can see some little puffs of venting coming out of the top of the second stage. I always love seeing those. Looks like a bull, I guess, a bull just sniffing before liftoff. We have a $5 super chat here from Daniel Thornton, saying, is all the propellant burned and or expended before re-entry and crashing into the ocean on expendable launches? I think the answer there is pretty much yes. Almost all the propellant should be expended. Again, we don't know the exact burn duration on this, or the exact propellant usage on this mission, but it should be almost entirely. So there should be a little bit of propellant left over in the tanks, very small amount, pretty much negligible, I would say.
I think I can say with certainty by the end of the mission there will be 0 left in the booster because there will be 0 booster left.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to burn up when the booster burns up in the atmosphere, so nothing really is going to hit the ocean that would cause any harm. Now we're coming up here on 1 minute and 30 seconds. We just heard that stage 2 liquid oxygen loading is complete. Now we're going to walk you through a little bit of the last few minutes of the countdown. Now you can see on your screen there the transporter erector is now purging itself of all propellants. You see some liquid oxygen being purged out right there. This is just to save the transporter erector. You don't want anything flammable in it because you're about to have something very flammable flying up right by it. So you don't want to have any risk of a ground support equipment damage because of fire. So they get all the propellants, all the liquid oxygen, all of the RP1 out of the transporter erector and away from the launch pad. Now we just passed T-1 minute. The flight computer is now in control of the liftoff, or in control of the vehicle, and the propellant tanks are being pressurized to flight. We just heard confirmation the vehicle has started up, so again, seems like a good countdown. Up in the next few seconds should be the last chance to scrub due to weather.
Everything appears to be go, and the vehicle is in control of the countdown at this point.
Beautiful. Now coming up at T-3 seconds, we're going to see the 9 first stage Merlin 1D engines ignite, followed 3 seconds later by liftoff. Now it's going to get a little bit loud here, so we're going to see you on the other side of liftoff. But the next event following liftoff at 1 minute and 16 seconds will be the maximum aerodynamic pressure when there's the maximum forces on the rocket. Coming up at T-minus 10 seconds, we hope you sit back, relax, and enjoy this beautiful liftoff of Falcon 9 with Eutelsat-10B. And we have engine ignition. And liftoff. Falcon 9 carrying Eutelsat-10B onto a super synchronous transfer orbit. Vehicles clear the towers. Stand by for sound. Wow, we're getting some gorgeous visuals here from SpaceX's tracking cameras, as well as Thomas out in the field tracking the vehicle. Coming up here on T-minus 1.5 minutes into flight, the vehicle's passed through maximum aerodynamic pressure. The next event coming up in about a minute will be main engine cutoff, followed by stage separation. But seems that we have had a nominal liftoff. Booster 1049 stretching its wings for the final time.
The second stage engine, the MVAC engine, should be chilling down now, getting it ready so that the super cold propellants will be flowing through it and will hopefully light.
And now we're getting one of my favorite visuals of launch. You can see the plume expanding in width. This is because the vehicle's getting higher and higher in Earth's atmosphere, where the pressure is getting lower and lower. So the engine exhaust is expanding as there's less pressure to push it inward. This is one of my favorite visuals of launch because you can see some orange, purple, and blue all working together, and it is just beautiful to see.
We should
Coming up here in
go ahead.
I was going to say, coming up about 20 seconds on main engine cutoff, all 9 first stage engines will shut down, the 2 stages will separate, and the second stage single engine will ignite.
And unlike past missions, the first stage will not do any burns or any flip maneuvers as it will be expended.
Coming up here on main engine cutoff. And we've had main engine cutoff. Stage separation. And upper stage ignition. Godspeed, Booster 1049.
Just a little sniffle.
Thanks for all the fish.
Thanks for all the fish, indeed.
So while this is going, Thomas, I think I heard it through our microphones here. Did we get a VAB screech?
Oh, we definitely did. I mean, I think those launches from 40 were at the perfect angle here at the press site. VAB was screeching indeed.
It was screeching because it misses 1049 already, but not that. It has totally not to do with the frequency at which the Merlin 1D engines vibrate in terms of the panels that are on the outside of the VAB. Of course not.
And coming up in fairing deployment in just a few seconds here. And yeah, Booster 1049 with 11 missions under its belt. That's a very successful career, in my opinion, for a very early serial number Falcon 9 first stage. And fairing deployment is confirmed. Eutelsat-10B is now exposed to the vacuum of space for the very first time. Now again, you can see that second stage Merlin vacuum engine burning there. This burn is going to last about another 5 minutes or so. This is going to get the second stage into a parking orbit. Now following that, about 20 minutes after that, or about 18 minutes to be exact, the second stage engine will reignite for a 1.5 minute burn. And that will get the both the second stage and the payload onto a super synchronous transfer orbit. Now, if you followed along with Falcon 9 launches in the past, you're going to notice that this is a very uneventful second stage burn because normally you see the first stage doing its boost back or maybe just its reentry burn, at least a flip or something like that. But unfortunately, the first stage is going out with a bang and burning up in the Earth's atmosphere in the coming minutes.
Yeah, in fact, you'll even notice that the telemetry is missing in the bottom left of the screen. Instead, we only just have the stage 2 telemetry in the bottom right.
Yes, and it's feeling like a much more traditional rocket launch, something that we'd see in the early 2000s, something that we see nowadays with the expendable launch vehicles.
It's so weird hearing expendable launch vehicle and Falcon 9 in the same sentence again.
Yeah, technically the rocket the Falcon 9 is an expendable launch vehicle in this circumstance. Very weird to think about. And it'll be especially weirder to think about when we see fully expendable Falcon Heavies coming up in the next 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yeah,
again, all seems well. Oh, go ahead, Sawyer.
I would make a joke about 1049, its destruction, but I can't think of any sick burns.
Anyway, moving on from that, we're about 5.5
Everyone
minutes.
groan.
You're going to make me cry on stream. But again, we're coming up on 6 minutes into liftoff. We have about 2.5 minutes left in the second stage burn. Again, this will insert both the second stage and the payload into a low Earth orbit, parking orbit, from where there will be a short, about 18-minute coast before the stage reignites. Again, all seems to be going well in the second stage engine burn.
Yeah, so far the vehicle looks like everything is performing well. Again, this one going to the super synchronous orbit, so a little bit past geostationary transfer orbit. Part of the reason why that first stage was expended, and again, you'll see that the altitude will be slightly different once, as you're keeping track of the second stage telemetry too, as a result of that.
Yep, and we have a question here actually in chat I want to ask real quick from MaxQ Model saying, was the first stage in any way different than a normal Falcon 9 first stage? And the only ways that I could really think about it being different are the landing legs were removed, the grid fins were removed, and the interstage was swapped out with an earlier Block 5 interstage that was painted white. And that was because 1049's interstage was actually loaned, or I guess at this point given, to booster 1052 so that it can be a Falcon 9 first stage booster. So yeah, it was 1049 flew this, and basically in normal Falcon 9 configuration, minus the grid fins and landing legs. Again, just over T plus 7 minutes into liftoff here, less than a minute left in the second stage burn. And again, all seems to be going well. We get a nominal liftoff, some beautiful tracking shots there. We heard some screeching from the VAB. If you don't know what that is, Sawyer, actually educate me too, because I'm not really too sure on what happens with VAB screeching. What happened there when we saw that? Or I guess heard that.
Yeah, once the mission's over, if you go back and rewatch the stream, you'll hear it shortly after. It sounds like someone is screeching or screaming, but it actually has to do with the frequency of the Merlin 1D engines. Based off of that frequency and just the way the wind kind of blows with the launch from SLC-40, the paneling on the outside of the vehicle assembly building actually vibrates at that frequency. And so when you hear that, it kind of sounds like a screeching or a screaming kind of sound. So we've just started calling that the VAB screech now.
Very cool. We got some live shots there from our Space Coast live stream showing the vehicle assembly building. And also one last thing about booster 1049 to mention, just so we don't get too sad, but this is the last fact. We've had second stage engine cutoff there. But booster 1049, which was expended on this flight, was the first booster to ever carry Starlink satellites into orbit. So another first there, but again, rest in peace, rest in pieces, booster 1049. And we have confirmation of nominal orbital insertion.
And we have confirmation as well of an empty launch pad.
I was about to say, a beautiful shot here of SLC-40 after a successful liftoff. I don't know what it is, but I just love looking at the transporter erector thrown back without a rocket. It looks just so off, but it just looks so cool. I don't really know how to describe it. I don't know. Maybe I'm just weird like that. Am I weird? I don't know. But anyway, looks like we've had a nominal liftoff. Again, the second stage and Eutelsat-10B are now in a parking orbit. They will coast now for about 20 minutes, and then the second stage engine will reignite. Real quick, we have a quick super chat here from Roseanne Devasto saying, love those vents. Absolutely, those vents looked really cool. I love seeing them every launch. As well as Tracy, who gifted 5 Red Team memberships out to the community. So thank you very much for to both of you for those. But I believe that's going to wrap it for our webcast coverage here tonight. Again, we saw a beautiful liftoff there, Falcon 9 punching through the clouds as SpaceX managed to find a hole and weave their way through some very off-nominal weather. Again, this was only a 10% go in terms of weather readiness tonight. So amazing, amazing odds that they managed to get to weave their way through the weather there. But again, thank you to everyone for watching. We appreciate everyone who supported with a super chat or even just by liking the live stream. If you want to get some more live views of this, of the Space Coast, of all the launch pads and the buildings around there, head over to Space Coast Live right after this live stream. You can catch, as you can see on the screen here, booster 1076, I believe that is, with CRS-26 on top, ready on pad 39A for liftoff no earlier than, I believe, tomorrow. Is that right? The next liftoff opportunity?
I believe
Saturday.
It's Saturday.
Saturday. Okay, I was very wrong there. So Saturday is the next liftoff opportunity of CRS-26. And finishing off here with a beautiful live view of second stage in orbit. But again, thank you everyone for watching. We appreciate all your support as always. I've been your host for this live stream, Ian Atkinson, reporter and writer at NASA Spaceflight. I was joined by Julia Bergeron. I'm not sure if she's here in the field. I know she's editing some photographs right now, and I cannot wait to see what she got tonight. But thank you very much, Julia, for being out there in the field and getting some great pictures for us. Also, Sawyer, thank you very much for tuning in, Sawyer, with your expertise and your, I was about to say great puns, but your great puns, I'll say.
Thank you. Yeah, I know they're terrible, but that's what makes them great. Thank you for having me on, and Thomas, I'll hopefully see you out in the field Saturday for CRS-26.
Yeah, that's going to be a beautiful liftoff, hopefully. And again, to Thomas, thank you very much for joining, Thomas, and for that great tracking shot you got in the beginning of the liftoff right there.
I appreciate that. I'm glad that one of these two rockets got off the ground. Looking forward to CRS on Saturday, trying again. And, all things told, good sound and good views after all that weather. It turned out to be a beautiful night to go to space, so I'm happy.
Absolutely. And again, some great visuals we saw through the clouds there of the Falcon 9. I'm actually going to go back and rewatch the live stream after this. And if anyone would like to join me, let's go on over and rewatch it. But again, and of course we had Patrick Colhoun here in the studio operating for us, pulling the, what does Jack say? Pulling the levers, pushing the buttons, something like that. I don't know. I'm not Jack. But thank you, Patrick, for operating the live stream. And again, thank you everyone for tuning in. We hope you enjoy the liftoff. We hope you have a great rest of your night. And if you're in the United States, we hope you have a happy Thanksgiving, spending some time with friends and family. And stay safe out there. Have a great rest of your night.
We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be nominal.
RCP chamber pressure looks good. Toggling up. Roger, roll, Atlantic.
Water towers, fly!
Tango Delta nominal.
Pilot downside, SCE off. Say again, SCE off.
Yikes. You bet. Okay. We don't need any more of these.